Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Races Expanded Android. For starters, you'll need to own the Biotech DLC to make use of the Vanilla Races Expanded content, as well as the workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. Whilst not required, this mod has some integration with the Ideology DLC, which gives a new preset relating to colonists' opinions towards androids. This mod introduces two new xenotypes, a starting scenario, a new event, a whole pile of structures and items, as well as unique genes for androids called hardware and subroutines. So we've got a lot to go through. Let's start with the easy bit, the new starting scenario. You're given 3 awakened androids and a little starter base with most of the structures that are included in the mod. The downside to this start? The buildings that you are given are very high value, and your starting pawns are unlikely to be able to defend it after the starter raids without taking a good chunk of damage. Not only that, we need to talk about the big blue elephant in the room of using an android-only colony, Neutramine. Referred to as Neutro from now on because I lack confidence in pronunciation. Android buildings, parts, and upkeep will all require silver, gold, plasteel, uranium, advanced components, and Neutro, as well as your usual steel and components. Androids are one of the most expensive expanded races created. If you're going to use this mod, you're likely going to need supporting mods to have a steady supply of resources to keep androids functioning at 100%. Whilst this can work standalone, it'll be an extremely annoying existence without using dev mode. The easiest mod to suggest using alongside androids is Regrowth Core, which will give you access to Neutralopes. They work like a Boomalope, only they taste of blue raspberry instead. You can also go the route of Vanilla Faction's expanded Mechanoids, which gives you access to automated factories that can produce all of the materials you'll need for androids, after an insane amount of investment into factory tech. Or you could also stack Outposts Expanded on top of Mechanoids to build your factories off the home tile with far less investment. This is quite a lot to throw at someone who just wants to make a pawn called Beep. It's why androids are almost impossible to recommend unless you're already going quite deep into the modded playthrough rabbit hole. So just know what you're getting into before adding this mod to your active list. We've gone over the material cost, so we might as well cover the structures. You have 2 lines of technology included in androids. You have Neutro Logistics and Android Tech. Neutro Logistics is a pipeline system to make it easier to store, transport, and administer Neutro where required. As the fluids are required to be kept sterile, silver is the material of choice when constructing pipelines and tanks. Fortunately, the taps and drains only need to be steel, because why bother keeping the place that you're pouring the highly sterile liquid into clean? If you have never used a modded pipeline in Rimworld before, they're simple. Tanks hold the material, be it chem fuel, gas, hemogen, paste, or in this case, Neutro. Pipes can be built either normally or subterranean for a slight increase in cost. These pipes work almost exactly the same as a power conduit, with the small change being that they need to reach the object to fuel it. They don't have the additional wire that objects connecting to power conduits use. Taps allow you to keep a small stack of the material on hand for colony use and will be topped up to the desired amount when pawns take from the stockpile. Drains allow your pawns to add the material into the pipeline storage tank. To avoid pawns repeatedly taking from the tap to the drain and getting stuck in a never-ending hauling loop, make sure that both are set to the same priority in storage management. Android Tech has a few structures which all have very specific uses. To start with, you'll always have the android stand spot, just on the off chance you get an android join your colony without any tech unlocked for them. This is essentially a sleeping spot. Androids don't need food or sleep as such, but they do clog their memory as they go throughout the day, eventually running out of free space and requiring somewhere to reformat. This spot fulfills that need, albeit a little more slowly. The android stand, not spot, is something you can build to better fulfill this need. This is your wooden bed or cloth bedroll equivalent. The Neutro Casket is the medical bed for androids, only instead of a doctor, you'll want a good crafter. This building is best when hooked up to a Neutro tank to keep it fueled at all times, saving a bit of legwork for your pawns. When an android lays in the casket, or is placed into one if their injuries are severe enough to require carrying, they will first be patched up to stop Neutro loss. Once all potential leaks are sealed, they'll be restored to full neutro capacity via pipes in the casket, with an android holding a total of 100 units in their body. Then, the crafter will spend some time restoring parts back to full functionality, hammering out dents, welding back any disconnected wires, resocketing bits that may have been knocked loose, and removing the bullets that were rattling around in their torso cavity. If any parts have been totally destroyed or removed, androids will also lay in this casket for procedures to install new components. As androids do not require anesthetic, they can immediately get back to action once this process is complete. The android part workbench is where you can craft everything and anything an android body could need, from fingers and toes to air filters and reactors. Just like workbenches, tool cabinets can be linked to boost production speed. The android creation station is not only fun to say, it's also the most important structure if you want to use androids. This is where they're born. I'll get into android creation in a little bit, but first let's cover the other structure required to make this work. The subcore polyanalyzer is needed to create a persona subcore. You'll also need a little plasteel, an advanced component, and 4 different biological pawns who are willing to be scanned. Once 4 scans have been completed, a new persona subcore will be created, which will form the basis of a brand new android. The persona itself isn't linked to the 4 pawns that were scanned, so you don't need to fret over who has their mind mapped to produce this item. And finally, you have the android behaviorist station. This allows you to reprogram androids if you want to change their subroutines and repurpose them for another task. Now, it's worth mentioning that there are 2 xenotypes added for androids. There are, well, the androids and awakened androids. Only androids can use this station. An awakened android essentially behaves the same as a colonist without the need for food, so they'll refuse to have their behaviour changed at this structure. So, let's talk about the big part. Hardware and subroutines. Both androids and awakened androids share certain hardware, as it's required to create a functioning android. The shared hardware between both xenotypes is memory processing, which replaces the need for food and sleep with the need to occasionally reformat at an android spot. Power, which gives the android its need for power. This can be fulfilled by keeping them installed with a functional reactor. The base rate for power loss is 0.83% a day, meaning that an android operating at 100% efficiency will last roughly 2 years before requiring a fresh reactor installation. If you overload an android with expensive subroutines, this will cause them to deplete the reactor quicker, similar to how a pawn with expensive metabolic genes typically requires more food to survive. Due to the nature of a uranium-powered reactor, you're likely to make a bit of waste when performing this procedure, so I hope you've got something to manage waste packs in your colony. There's synthetic body, which means androids need repairs rather than medicine and will not be able to heal naturally. Neutro circulation, which replaces blood with neutro, another component that androids cannot normally produce, meaning you'll need to top them up if they experience any bleeding wounds or lost limbs. They can work without a full tank of neutro, but it's similar to a colonist walking around with blood loss. Synthetic immunity, which provides not only total immunity to environmental conditions, but also negates all illnesses to the android. Thankfully, computer viruses don't appear to exist in Rimworld either, so they're entirely safe from bugs. Component freezing and component overheating replace hypothermia and heatstroke. Parts may freeze and fracture in extreme cold temperatures, and at high temperatures an android is unable to continue processing, becoming locked in a constant state of reformatting until the heat in the area dissipates. Cold and heat tolerant add some additional flexibility in comfortable ranges for androids. And finally, psychically deaf prevents androids from being affected by positive or negative psycasts, psychic drones, and it makes it nearly impossible for them to become a proficient user of psycasts. Now, these are all shared. A basic android will come in with a suite of incapabilities as well. They don't care about joy, beauty, comfort, outdoors, drugs, or room size. They ignore pain entirely, they gain no skills, receive no inspirations, cannot experience a mental break, and form no bonds with other colonists. They are, like the majority of Twitter users, total bots. So with a basic android being incapable of so much, you may wonder why you'd even want them. This is where subroutines come in. Every basic android can be customized to fit whatever role you desire by modifying them at the behavior station. This is why an awakened android refuses the procedure. They are, for all intents and purposes, a colonist that just so happens to be made out of plasteel. They learn, love, feel, and develop just like a normal colonist would. Or at least, how they're programmed to think a normal colonist would. Let's dig into the subroutines and see how you can modify your basic androids around the colony. The first and easiest section of subroutines to mention is skill modifiers. You can ignore taking a modifier to have 0 skill in that area, or remove the capability entirely for an additional bit of power efficiency. Then you have basic, intermediate, advanced, and expert ranks of each work type, adding 4, 8, 12, or 16 levels respectively. If you want your android to simply spend all day cooking, cleaning, and occasionally helping the group with combat, you can safely make them an expert in shooting and cooking, then make them incapable of every other work type that you have no need for. This gives them a huge bonus in power efficiency. Other subroutines are a little less straightforward. You have vulnerability choices, which will either cause the android to shut down or take increased damage from different types of exposure, such as solar flare, EMP, fire, and rain. Providing you can keep your android away from these risks, it's a great boost to power efficiency. Androids can be given slow or fast RAM to replace the default values if needed, which makes reformatting take more or less time. As android stands can only be made to base quality, this is the only way of speeding up their rest. Cold efficiency is a fairly unique bonus that allows androids to work at improved rates when below freezing temperatures, while still requiring them to remain above their component freezing threshold. This can be massively useful in certain biomes or areas purely designed for androids to work in, kept nice and cool to make them really fly through tasks. Androids are given an option of a low or a high power setting, which impacts power efficiency massively at the cost of changing global work speed and movement speed. Remember that going into a high negative with power efficiency means the android's reactor will burn out faster, but the high power setting is almost equal to having jogger and industrious on a normal pawn. Worth. Uncontrollable makes the android behave like a colony animal rather than a colony pawn. They follow their schedule and that's it. You can't force them to work with right click, nor can you draft them. If given certain tasks, it's essentially free efficiency. If you want a fantastic crafter that just stays in their box and makes dusters all day, simply set their work schedule correctly, set them to an allowed area for the crafting room, leave them to it. Anti-awakening protocols will stop basic android from ever ascending to an awakened android. This is essential if you want to keep your army of worker bots just the way they are. Emotion simulators will allow the android to form a social connection. I mean, we've all seen the AI girlfriend apps, so there has to be a colonist or two out there that would appreciate this. Presence Firewall is a crazy unique mechanic. It prevents basic androids from being counted towards the raid scaling math. This allows you to run a colony with 20 basic androids roaming around doing all of the work, whilst having only 4 biological colonists, without also being hit by a raid in the 80s or 100s. You're still likely to get a large raid because of the colony wealth required to run androids, but this does help massively offset the scaling. Zero Waste removes the toxic waste packs created when changing out a reactor core on an android, and Extra Waste does the opposite. If you've got a group of wasters using androids as labourers, they'll enjoy the extra crap around the base. Lovely depleted uranium. Such a warm fuzzy feeling. Self-recharge allows an android to replace their own reactor, in case they're the only one with a reasonable crafting skill in the colony and need to do this as a self-tend before they shut down. Memory decay will cause skills to slowly fall over time at a rate of 1 every 15 days. This means you'll need to return the android to the behaviour station every so often to restore their skills to the originally set level. This is a bit of free efficiency for the cost of extra micromanagement. Sleep mode allows you to turn androids on and off as required, to save their power and keep them right where they're needed at any given time. Ideal for a standing army of androids that have poor power efficiency due to a high amount of combat subroutines. Mech link support grants a basic level of control over mechanoids to the android, bots within bots. Nutrosynthesis is one of the most expensive subroutines. and understandably so. It gives the android a very slow generation of neutro to replenish any that they may have lost, which removes one of the most expensive downsides to androids. Solar powered is similar, but for power rather than neutro. You can keep an android working outside as often as possible, maybe it's a planter, animal handler, or a hunter. This can dramatically boost the expected lifespan of their reactor. With a high power efficiency, they might never need to replace their reactor at all. Clear instructions removes a lot of RNG with certain tasks, making it impossible to fail most jobs and removing the risk of cooking food that will poison colonists, because that was totally an accident, definitely not intended.
You are not welcomed here. Remove yourself.
Self-destruct protocols are for when you absolutely want the last laugh, a final FU. Remember that sleep mode I mentioned? You can hide a sleeping, self-destructing android just outside of your kill box for when things start to go south. Move them in, push the button, and hope that they don't die before the countdown completes. Most other subroutines are fairly standard. Beauty-based buffs or negatives, and a lot of cosmetic choices, including the android skin if you want them to stand apart from a normal pawn. So that is a hell of a lot. This is also why I find androids very tricky to place. An awakened android is a more expensive colonist that's harder to treat when injured. So if you're using androids, you likely want an army of basics that have been very specifically designed for their given role. But then comes the issue of, well, a new colonist would do the same role and they'd be able to level up. You could heal them. They wouldn't require all of this extra tech and all of this expense to keep them functioning. They'd also have the possibility of different races or xenogene modifications. But wait. How do you get an awakened android anyway? I've only mentioned starting with them or building a basic android. Well, you've got to push a basic android to the extreme end of the mood spectrum and hope that you make them snap. Like I didn't manage to when trying to get this footage. They either need to be utterly miserable or in unparalleled joy. Even though a basic android has no need for joy, they do still track it in the background. If they stay at a low or a high mood for an extended period of time and they haven't got the anti-awakening protocol installed, they might just become self-aware and start acting like a normal colonist, experiencing a mental break that transforms them from a basic android into an awakened android, regaining all of the needs besides food and sleep, which are still replaced by power and memory. Androids fit in this place of a highly thematic colony, a solid example of the rule of cool versus actual functionality. If you're a min-max player, androids are going to boil your piss. Crazy expensive, very little upside, a combat nightmare. If you're in the game for a fun time, you'll love these folk. Each one is highly unique, a colonist on demand as it were, and there's a great narrative twist when one awakens and joins the colony, developing a deeper personality. Well, this was certainly one of the more informational dumpy videos that I've made. I was personally a little overwhelmed when I originally used this mod, as it's similar to being slapped with the xenogene screen or the ideology screen for the first time. Just lots of numbers, names, icons, all expecting you to know what they mean. Realistically, with this mod, you have maybe 20 or so things to choose from with a basic android, and everything else is just a skill or cosmetic choice. The main thing is keeping their power use balanced so they aren't burning through reactors all the time. And that's it. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments and I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.